Hey guys, Ron here. Well, the last time I was here, I think it was a freezing night, as it is fall through winter, and now it's quite warm. Yes, seasons matter and a lot more crowded. I like it when it's quiet. It's crowded. Restaurants staying open later, weather's warmer, tourists come out. Anyway, and I'm sorry my eye is tearing because some suntan lotion got in it, even though I'm using face cream. The only reason I tell you that is because if you see me doing this or it looks a little more red, my left eye here, it's because it's tearing, and I'm going to have to put some soap and water in there, or at least some water, and flush it out later. Anyway, I'm back. I've been away for a little while, too busy to do anything, researching a few subjects, not able to get up to any celebrity houses. Um, it's tough. It's driving around Los Angeles. If I want to go to the Hollywood Hills, which kind of divide the city in half, north to south, that's several hours. And if you could do it in traffic, forget it. So you've got to really time it properly. So I will be doing that again soon. Anyway, today I'm out here amongst the boats again, and I'm going to talk about George Michael, the late singer-songwriter, performer who was really one of the most, he sold over 100 million records. And if we would have lived to 83 instead of 53, I think he would have maybe sold 300 million records. Anyway, I'm going to talk about mostly his tragic final years. Anyway, let me flip over, so to speak, and go from there so you don't see my tearing eye. There they are, Baywatch. In many ways, George Michael's story is not in many ways. I'll take that back. In some ways, George Michael's story echoes Elvis's story, although there are some, I keep going back and forth. There's some similarities, but not a huge amount of similarities, only that each superstar kind of descended further into, I think, depression and unhappiness and self-medicated with drugs, and got worse, for lack of a better term, as time went by. By the time middle age hit, both were in pretty bad shape, and Elvis didn't even live as long as George Michael. George Michael had him beat by 11 years, but I think Elvis would have continued to get worse as well had he not sought treatment, which he probably wouldn't have done. But George Michael is a really fascinating character, a fascinating individual. His real name was not George Michael. That was a stage name. It was a Greek name, which I'm afraid is kind of unpronounceable to me. So rather than repeat it, I'll just go with George Michael, and that's how we all know him anyway. In his teenage years, he befriended a guy named Andrew Ridgeley, and they hung out, they did music together, they formed a ska band for a while with a couple other guys, and then they settled on a duo between Andrew and George and formed the group Wham. And Wham was very successful right off the charts because of the guy's looks, because of George's voice, because of the songs that he wrote, because of, they just, early 80s, right place, right time. And that was probably the height of when I was listening to popular music, because of my age at the time, how young I was. And I'll tell you, we had some great music. I know every generation says that, but when I was 16, 17, 18 through 25 or so, some really, really good music. I mean, it was, in the 80s were kind of looked down on by some folks in the 80s, saying, well, the 70s was the serious, heavy music, which is true with the serious singer-songwriters. And, the 60s as well, to a degree, in the 80s was sort of the happy-pappy music. But it wasn't all happy-pappy music, and I will not be going down there. Kids are out of school, obviously. I think society needed music to be a little lighter than it was in the 60s and 70s. The Vietnam War was over. It was the beginning of the Me generation. And anyway, George Michael and Wham, they fit right in, and some great songs right off the bat. and Wake Me Up Before I Go Go and Careless Whispers. And God, that was on the radio all the time. I mean, you turn on the radio, you leaving work, all the time those songs. All the time. Radio play was huge in those days because it was well, it was even before, a little bit before CDs. So it was, vinyl records and cassette tapes and the radio. Anyway, so Wham takes off like a rocket. The duo is selling millions of records. I mean, sometimes 25 million records. And a couple of years into it, George goes off on his own, forming a solo career. And Careless Whispers is released as a solo song, even though it had been written a few years earlier. And it's just a huge song, and it propelled him into the stratosphere of singer-songwriters, with a great voice too, by the way. And from that point, it was onward and upward. Everything George did was touching gold, basically. Now, the 80s were before his personal life became a problem in his life. And as time went on, he became more and more... let me back up by saying George, I believe, in my opinion, was an extraordinarily talented man, a very well-spoken, intelligent man, an angry man, and a bit of a paranoid man with kind of a persecution complex. I think that, I'm looking to avoid this situation here. That's why I'm pausing. So, anyway, I think that George, he almost became a prisoner of his own fame. But all I can say is that throughout the 80s, like I said, Wham was a huge group. Okay, I have to avoid this situation. Be right back. I really have to learn Spanish because I feel so left out of so many conversations I hear around me in Los Angeles. But I need to be fluent in Spanish, and even though I took 4 years of it in junior high and into high school, I only know a few words. If I would have known at the time. Good thing I didn't take French, though. Anyway, so George Michael, like I said, his career and his personal trajectory was not going to happen, is it? No. Anyway, as you know, I flip around from decades, but I could say that the real steady decline in George Michael's life was the last 5 years. The last 10 years were rough, but everything started about 20 years earlier. So Wham is going strong in the 80s, stronger than ever. According to George, he was involved with women quite a bit, groupies. He actually had one woman that he considered a relationship. He considered himself bisexual. Now, this was all, of course, completely secret to the public. This was a different era then. Really afraid it would hurt his career because he was so much like a pop idol to young women as well. So he considered himself bisexual, but he was fighting with himself all the time because he had said that there was a part of him, a big part of him, that knew that really wasn't true. Then he said that because of AIDS, he was really afraid of possibly getting sick, obviously, and then passing it on to one of his female partners. So he said then he stopped seeing women, and that was part of it anyway. However, interestingly enough, as I'll talk about, George's life became much more promiscuous and doing wild, irresponsible things, including, regarding his sexuality and his substance abuse as he got older. When he was younger, his life was actually rather tame compared to how it was when he got older. So he stopped seeing women entirely, and about 1990 or 91, he forms his first, when he was about 27, 28, he forms his first relationship with a man, a real, relationship, whether he was, according to his own, how should I say this, according to what he said, he was probably never monogamous. He certainly commented that in his next relationship, his second long-term relationship with an American man, that he said he was still cruising for anonymous sex with men all the time, and that his boyfriend knew about it and was okay with it. So whether he was faithful to the first boyfriend or not, Anselmo, who knows? Anyway, according to him, and again, he had not come out yet, that Anselmo was very, very important to him. Anselmo was a Brazilian photographer and makeup artist, and about 6 months into the relationship, Anselmo contracted HIV, I believe HIV/AIDS actually, and he said he wanted to go back home to Brazil to pursue medical treatments there, and George did not go with him, which kind of tortured George till the end of his life. I mean, he supposedly, Anselmo didn't want him to go. He didn't want him to risk his career, the publicity. George likewise was afraid of how it would affect his career, but this was a major turning point in George's life. And then about 2 years later, Anselmo actually died of AIDS. Obviously, George was terrified of becoming ill himself. There was, I believe, a Thanksgiving or a Christmas. No, it can't be Thanksgiving because it was in England. So he went to see his family, I believe, for Christmas. And the family knew he was very, very upset. And he didn't want to tell them, because not only did he not want to scare them, saying he might have been exposed to AIDS, but his parents didn't know he was gay. And he said his father really wouldn't have accepted it. He was close to his parents and his sisters, but he was particularly close to his mother, who he eventually did tell about Anselmo. After Anselmo died, actually, he told them. He wrote a song about him and dedicated that song to Anselmo at every concert performance. So I think he was making his way, inching his way to coming out to the world, which probably would have made him happier earlier. Then, like I say, gets into another relationship with Kenny, an American. And then a couple of years into the relationship with Kenny, and after Anselmo's death, he loses his mother to cancer. And I think that, and he even said he thought he was cursed at that time. I think that the combination, because we've all faced trauma and loss, and I think the combination of Anselmo's death and his mother's death within a 4-year period was, I think it was too much for him to take. I think he snapped. And it affected his personal life, his professional life. He was fighting with the record company. He started refusing to be in videos, his music videos. He was becoming politically active. Now, I just always assumed that George was, a liberal on the left, because he was in the entertainment business, because, it's very common whether someone's in Hollywood or in the music business, and other reasons. And but it was more than that. I researched and found out that his father was actually a registered communist, and that George registered as the Young Communist League. That's not the name, but that's sort of what it was, when he was 15 years old. So George was far left. Now I'm skipping ahead in time, but at the beginning of the Iraq War in 2002, 2003, he put out a video mocking Tony Blair and George Bush, and it's called Shoot the Dog, and it was about his dislike for both those politicians and the Iraq War. And he received a lot of pushback in England and in America. Being politically very vocal in the pre-Twitter days, even from somebody in Hollywood, wasn't nearly as considered as cool or acceptable as it is now. And I think Twitter has something to do with it, social media. But in 2002, the world was a different place. So anyway, I stated how after Anselmo's death, I think that started the decline. I don't think he was in very good shape when he was with Kenny. And That relationship ended. And in 1998, probably the most humiliating thing happened. He was followed into a restroom. I've actually pointed this restroom. I actually have a vlog on this, and I pointed the restroom out in a couple of videos. It's in a park, which is right across from the Beverly Hills Hotel. He was followed in a police officer. The police officer was undercover. It must have been known. Every time I've been in that restroom, nobody's in there. But it's just a little bathroom, park bathroom, but it must have been known as sort of a hangout in 1998 for illicit activity. And, I guess the cop kind of, I don't know what you call it, entrapment, I guess not, because George was found guilty. But George wanted to participate in some sexual activity with the undercover policeman who arrested him, and that sort of forced George to come out. Now, he went on TV in America after that, and he said he was glad that he was able to come out. He wished it hadn't happened in that way, but he said he was very happy being a gay man. He had found himself, and he did a song called Outside and a video that parodied the whole incident. In fact, the police officer actually sued him but lost. He said that he was causing emotional distress and mocking him as a police officer and so on and so forth. So around the turn of the 21st century, even though George purported to be happy or happier, things were not going well in relationships, and he had lost his first love and he had lost his mother, both of which, like I said, I believe deeply affected him. I'm going to go again, look for a quieter spot, be right back. And then the problem started there were multiple arrests concerning drugs. Now, George said he was smoking 25 joints a day. He said later years, last 5 years, he got a little better, down to 7 or 8 joints a day. The problem was that not only does that much marijuana can cause one to be paranoid, even delusional, and other issues, but he was doing harder drugs, and it was only found out later. He was found passed out in a car. He was doing crack cocaine. Crack cocaine certainly can make one delusional. It can make one psychotic. He was doing GHB. He was doing all kinds of drugs. We don't know about heroin, but certainly he admitted to, obviously, something as possibly benign as marijuana, or lots of marijuana, to crack cocaine, which is some serious stuff. So he was arrested a few times. He crashed his car a couple times, and it was becoming clear, especially in the English tabloids, that George was a drug addict, had a real substance abuse problem, and was having brushes with the law, and doing, he did community service for the violation in the park and similar things. I don't believe he certainly never went to prison for the drug-related incidences. But there was a time where he was, in 2013, thrown out or fell out of his car and had only luckily superficial injuries. What was going on? Was George trying to kill himself? Was he literally throwing himself out of a car? Was he in a psychotic state? And I believe it was 2013. He had an infection. He was very ill. Canceled a tour or two, and then went on, and then had chest pains. This thing lasted forever. Got pneumonia, and then was actually in a coma in hospital for a while. And when there's an interview, you can watch where he comes out of the coma, and where he's starting to feel a little healthy again, but he's very breathless in this interview. And I believe he's standing outside his home, thanking the hospital staff who literally brought him back to life. This man was very, very ill, physically and emotionally. He had performed a free concert for the nurses who had taken care of his mother. It didn't come out until the very end, after George was dead, how philanthropic he was. This man donated millions of pounds, millions of dollars, millions of pounds to various charities, and not just obviously combating AIDS, charities combating AIDS, but all kinds of things. He actually paid for the Christmas lights anonymously in his town there in England, and other Christmas decorations. Loved Christmas. Ironic that he died on Christmas Day. So here he is having trouble with the law. He's having trouble with substances. The press is after him, reporting all his problems, and he gets caught cruising in the woods and blames the media for following him around while he's looking for anonymous sex. So some say he was, his own worst enemy, but he became very embittered towards the media, particularly in England, but I guess media everywhere. So it was a tough time. So we find a man getting more and more embittered, more angry, which caused him to be more possibly paranoid, more reclusive. And by the last couple of years of his life, he's in a relationship with Fadi, Fatwa, I'm mispronouncing that too, his Lebanese boyfriend. And according to Fadi, the last couple of years, he said George was, now there's varying accounts, but let's do something first here. I show you this photo because it's quite sad, but this is a photo of George Michael shortly before his death. Now, apparently he did lose some weight. I'd like to know what that big jowl on his neck is, and he even had that when he he even had that before and after, when he had lost some of the weight. So I'm not sure what that was, but as you can see, George had gained a lot of weight, and his appearance had changed even before that. In photos, he was wearing glasses all the time. He had gained weight, although not that much weight. His head was almost completely shaved. He just didn't look like himself. Now, obviously this happened to Elvis as well. George looked like he had gained at least 50 pounds, the same way Elvis did in the last few years of his life. So I'm thinking, did George become a recluse because he was, such a handsome guy in his youth up until his 40s? Did he start becoming a recluse because partially of the weight gain and the change in his appearance? Or was it simply because of his emotional state? And according to Fadi, George was doing drugs morning, noon, and night in the last year or so. Now, again, we don't know, because there's a couple of statements by Fadi that I think are kind of dubious at best. Hold on. Months after that photo that I just showed you, months after that, the heavy George Michael photo was taken. He was getting more, like I said, getting more and more reclusive. Now, on Christmas Eve, 2016, and George hadn't produced any new music in quite a while, but supposedly he was getting back into writing and recording, or would be shortly. So Christmas Eve 2016, there's a torchlight procession in his town, and all the people go by with the lit torches, and several of them said they could see George looking out through his window. Like I said before, he loved Christmas, and this must be quite a thing, seeing, hundreds, thousands of people walking by your house with torches. As long as it's not to go get Frankenstein, it's just a holiday celebration thing. So he sees this, and the neighbors and people report, one neighbor report that he was looking out the window at it. Now, by the next morning, the world gets reports by Fadi, his companion, his partner, that George is dead. Now, he says, I don't know why he wasn't questioned further or was on this, that he slept in his car outside the house that night, Christmas Eve, which also would have been weird. It must have been after the torchlight procession. Then headed up to the house, and in the morning found George alone, dead in his bed, and that Fadi worked on him for an hour with CPR. Right. Now, I don't know how much CPR he knew. And an hour, do you know how long it is, an hour? You'd imagine that after pumping his chest or whatever he was doing, or the breathing thing, you'd imagine that after 10 seconds, 2 minutes, he'd know that George was blue and dead and gone and in rigor. I believe they found him in rigor mortis, meaning he had been dead for a while, sometime probably during the night, died. It seems inexplicable to me that he literally worked on him for an hour before phoning the police. In England, that's 999. In America, it's 911. So he claimed he had slept in his car, found George the next morning, worked on him for an hour, and that was it. The police, there was an autopsy, but the first test came back inconclusive. They couldn't bury him because of that, so that led to other rumors. Fadi went to Twitter, and his tweets became increasingly accusatory, saying George had tried several times, many times, to kill himself, and he finally succeeded on Christmas Day, morning 2016. He said that George didn't write his own songs. He hired people to write them for him. You think those people wouldn't have been quiet if that were the truth, right? Even with an NDA. And he said, that George was, like I said, doing drugs morning, noon, and night. Now, maybe, who knows? All I can say is he was left out of the will. George's $100 million fortune, £100 million fortune, went to George's blood family, biological family. His sisters and his father obviously would have been his mother too, had she not passed away. So his partner got nothing. Now, I don't know whether he knew that at the time or not, but all I know is, in other words, did he know that and want to badmouth him? I don't know, because later he said, later he said that he was hacked. His Twitter was hacked, and just like Joy Reid, amazingly enough, I didn't say all those terrible things. He said that his Twitter was hacked, and he never said George had a death wish. He did an about face. I don't know, folks. Sounds a little suspicious to me. I don't know what happened. I don't think we'll ever know how to. I think it's going to be one of those Marilyn Monroe things where 10 years after the fact, which is only, 3 years from now, from this taping, maybe people will go back into the case and start saying, was it really a cut and dry death? Now, George's autopsy came back and it just showed heart disease and a fatty liver probably from alcohol consumption, and the heart disease could have been genetic, or it certainly could have been caused by all the substances he used, particularly the crack cocaine. So the part of the autopsy which showed his level of narcotics in his system, to my knowledge, has never been released. So here's the question. Considering the fact that he was addicted to drugs, and according to his companion, at least, that George was on drugs all the time, I bet it's a fair guess that he had drugs in his system, including probably prescription antidepressants, which he also took. So were those a contributory factor? Maybe. Who knows? So then you got to ask yourself, was there motive for the coroner to hide the fact? Did George accidentally overdose? Did he kill himself? It becomes a lot like Marilyn Monroe. Did she accidentally overdose? Was she murdered? Or did she deliberately overdose? I just find the parallels here kind of interesting. Then again, with so many celebrity suicides, I don't know what the motivation would be in England for these British coroners to lie about, suicide versus quote-unquote natural causes. Natural causes at 53, it's pretty rare. Even with the weight gain that George had, even with the, it's still rare. Had his heart muscle been weak for decades, as it was because of drug use? Had no one ever detected it before? And anything's possible. So it was a sad, lonely, mysterious end for one of the total incredible superstars of popular music in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, 3 decades. Brilliant songwriter, smart guy, well-spoken, very talented, very angry, very creative, went through a lot of personal turmoil and torment, and had millions of fans and sold millions of records. Anyway, so that's the story of the late George Michael, and I know it's a long one. I hope some of you hung in there to this point. Anyway, guys, if you like my channel, again, my name is Ron. If you like the channel, please do subscribe. If you do subscribe, hit the little bell icon, then you'll be notified when I post. Please give me likes, folks, because it propels things, through the algorithm of Facebook. And I look forward to YouTube, and I look forward to seeing your comments. All right, guys, see you at the next location. Thank you. Bye-bye.